Thank you all for joining us today. We are a team protecting our protectors, composed of myself, Janna, Mohamed, and Sumegha Jain. We are master's students in the Translational Research Program at the University of Toronto. We're excited to get to be sharing our Capstone project on reimagining occupational smoke mitigation strategies for Canadian wildland firefighters. So a brief overview of what we'll be covering in our presentation. So first, we'll provide some contextual understanding of the background of our chosen problem and need. Next, we'll cover our study and our research process. Following that, we'll highlight our findings and its significance, and ending with future direction, considering long-term goals such as our sustainability plan and overall impact of our research. So to get into our background, so first I want to start by recognizing our team and how we all came to be. So all three of us come from places around the world where we have firsthand experience with compromised air quality. Our lived experience became our personal motivators to protect people's health from air pollution, and that drew us together for this Capstone project. So what is translational research? So in our program, we use a human-centered design research approach that aims to move evidence and scientific findings into interventions that improve health. So this approach emphasizes how, as researchers, we can use a person-centered approach to meaningfully engage with the end users from the very beginning of the process to co-develop an intervention that is impactful. So the first step we took to defining our target population was asking the question, what is the problem and whose need is it? We started this by engaging with people and used a variety of outreach tools listed on the screen. So talking to people was the biggest factor in helping us identify who is most impacted by air pollution and where there is a need and desire to improve the current state. So our outreach process started in urban air pollution, where we spoke to subject matter experts in epidemiology, healthcare professionals, air quality experts, and lived experiences, until in October 2023, we spoke to wildland firefighters and landed in the wildfire space. So you might be wondering, as outsiders to the space with no relevant expertise, how we did our best to inform ourselves of the world of wildland firefighting. So this stemmed from a place of curiosity and engagement, and we consulted with various different avenues of people, organizations, resources to better our knowledge and understanding of what wildland firefighting context looks like in Canada, and the gaps and challenges they currently face to better inform our project. So I want to highlight as well the significance of lived experience. We spoke to several wildland firefighters and wildfire personnel who shared with us their boots on the ground perspectives, which gave us an immense insight into the context of wildland firefighting. So we identified there is an urgent and significant need to protect the health and well-being of wildland firefighters. So currently there is no standardized respiratory protection for wildland firefighting under the NFPA standard, which is the National Fire Protection Association. So as such, there is little to no uptake of respiratory protection, leaving wildland firefighters exposed to the hazards of smoke for prolonged periods of time during their duties. We also identified areas of improvement for awareness and knowledge sharing of the health impacts of smoke pollution. So the International Agency for Research on Cancer identified firefighting as a carcinogenic occupation. Wildland firefighters are exposed to a composition of various particulates, gases, vapors, and metal toxins that increase the risk of harm to health. In terms of long-term risks, there are gaps in knowledge on cardiorespiratory outcomes, and there is still emerging research being developed looking at health outcomes in longitudinal studies, but preliminary findings do show there are increased risk of cardiovascular diseases and lung cancers. Acute impacts are more well-studied, and evidence shows wildland firefighters are 2 times more likely to develop asthma compared to the general public, and there are studies showing evidence to respiratory irritation and changes to lung functionality after wildfire season. So ultimately, we identified 2 gaps in education and training on smoke health impacts, as well as lack of contextually appropriate respiratory mitigation strategies. For our capstone, we narrowed our focus to mitigation strategies, and you will see in our study findings how both these gaps are interconnected and how we aim to tackle this. So to come to the problem and need statements, the problem is that wildland firefighters face significant exposure to air pollutants without mitigation measures, and the need is for effective mitigation measures to reduce wildland firefighters' exposure to air pollutants. So on to our study. To get started in this space, we needed subject matter expertise to advise our project and ensure that it was grounded in the realities and the appropriate insights of the wildfire space. So we are very grateful to have our PAC members, Dr. Rakesh Sahu, a biomedical engineer from McMaster University, Lachlan Ari, a lived experience wildland firefighter of over 19 years, and Dr. Heather Simpson, a fire science expert with previous wildland firefighting experience, as well as our TRP supervisors, Dr. Joseph Fernbach and Dr. Edita Marcone. We had two specific research questions guiding the study. So the primary question asks, how does a level of health concern for smoke exposure influence behavior in adopting respiratory protective equipment? So our hypothesis was that wildland firefighters with higher levels of health concern for smoke exposure would wear protective equipment more regularly. We also had a translational question, and this asks what strategies could be used to optimize the mitigation of long-term exposure to smoke pollutants for wildland firefighters. And this was intentionally more vague with no hypothesis to avoid biasing outcomes of potential strategies. So we use a mixed methods research approach consisting of an initial survey to get a baseline understanding of wildland firefighters' experience with exposure to smoke through current respiratory PPE usage, gaps and challenges, and the awareness of smoke health impacts. And findings from the survey informed a collaborative ideation session, which consisted of brainstorming mitigation strategies with subject matter expertise and wildland firefighters in tandem to identify key considerations and more contextual understanding of wildland firefighters' needs for respiratory protective strategies. For our data analysis, we use a variety of methods like descriptive statistics, significance tests, correlations tests, and thematic analysis, which will be discussed more in detail by Janna. In terms of our recruitment strategy, that was done through snowball sampling of the networks we had built through our initial outreach, and we had 30 participants.
Thank you, Arani. So for this next section, we'll go through the main findings of the study, starting off with survey demographics. Our study sample was 30 participants, and in Figure A, you can see the distribution of fire agencies of participants where they could choose more than one option, as it's common for wildland firefighters who work across Canada. The majority of our sample, about 63%, had experience in British Columbia. Secondly, in Figure B, you can see that 60% of wildland firefighters of our study had 3 or more seasons or years of experience. 30% had 2 seasons of experience, and 10% had only worked a season. So now moving on to findings from our survey, we're going to first share 3 key data sets. First, we investigated the general usage of respiratory protective equipment by participants, where 40% have worn face masks, 27% have tried half-face respirators, 20% have tried full-face respirators, 10% have worn cloths or bandanas, and 1% has even tried the powered air purifying respirator, also known as PAPR. From this data, we induced that a variety of respiratory PPE has been tried by wildland firefighters. Next, we assessed the distribution of concern for long-term health impacts associated with smoke, where 6 people were extremely concerned, 8 were very concerned for long-term health outcomes of smoke exposure, and in general, 29 out of the 30 respondents, so about 97%, expressed a level of concern for health outcomes. Lastly, how frequently did the wildland firefighters wear respiratory PPE? This figure shows percent of respondents, where our data suggests that only 6% of wildland firefighters wore it every day, 30% wore it most fireline days, 17% wore it on some days, 20% rarely wore respiratory PPE, and 27% voted not applicable, meaning wearing respiratory PPE was not common or not provided. So with these 3 observations, we found an interesting connection, where it seemed that some respiratory PPE was made available to wildland firefighters, and most wildland firefighters had concerns for health impacts of smoke exposure. However, there is a gap in frequently wearing respiratory PPE. This insight got us thinking, why is that the case? So we looked into whether there was any association between respiratory PPE usage and health concern. This was done through a Likert transformation of data points, where level of health concern values were transformed into a numerical scale from 1 to 5, as seen on the x-axis, where 1 represents not at all concerned and 5 is extremely concerned. On the y-axis, data points represent PPE usage, where 1 represents yes to wearing respiratory PPE and 2 represents no. We ran a correlation test between these two variables, and we found a weak correlation coefficient, which does not support our initial hypothesis that wildland firefighters with a higher health concern would wear PPE. So it seemed that there was another variable impacting PPE usage that's not health concern. So this quote from the open-ended question shares some insight into the reality of wildland firefighting. The quote says, knowing that breathing in smoke isn't good in the long run, if the innovation helps to reduce the smoke and at the same time isn't a hinder in everyday tasks, then I'm all in. I'll wear it every time. This was shared by a wildland firefighter with more than 3 years of experience. This quote, alongside other data points we analyzed, revealed an insight to us of the lack of practicality of current respiratory PPEs. This insight validated the need to reimagine respiratory protective equipment for wildland firefighters, which brings us to the second method adopted during our study, the ideation session. This figure provides an overview of our ideation session. First, we had the overall prompt or translational question, as mentioned by Arani, which guided the session, which says what strategies can reduce respiratory exposure to smoke to protect long-term health outcomes. We divided the ideation session into 2 rounds of 25 minutes each based on occupational tasks, followed by a group session debrief. The first round, as seen on the left, focuses on offensive fire suppression tasks such as direct attack. The second round, as seen on the right, focuses on maintenance and rest tasks such as mop-up. Now, if these terminologies made no sense to you when you hear them for the first time, that's what we had considered as well, which is why we prepared pre-ideation session information packages for the multidisciplinary experts joining the session. This package, which you could access if you scan the code, was 2 pages of overview information on wildland firefighting gear, equipment, what current respiratory PPEs have been tried, and what the types of fire suppression tasks constitute and what they mean. This was given to the subject matter experts before the ideation session to help them inform themselves of the wildfire space, which was crucial to ensure that the engineers and scientists who joined the session, as seen on the screen, were capacitated with information on wildland firefighting that the occupational health and safety experts and lived experience champions were already aware of. I will now pass it on to Sumegha to discuss the ideation session findings.
Thank you, Janna. I will now walk you all through our ideation session findings. On the left side, you can see a snapshot of our Miro board, which captured a wide range of ideas and insights during the session. These ideas were then systematically transferred to an Excel sheet shown on the right, where we organized them into codes. The coding process involved numbering the ideas based on their frequency and relevance to overarching themes that emerged from the session. This method also allowed us to identify key patterns and prioritize the most critical concepts for further analysis. We gathered a total of 184 ideas. We then categorized them into 13 distinct themes. Notably, the majority of these ideas were centered around the themes of constraint, which defined by as per our study is limitation to consider from the unique conditions and realities of the occupation of wildland firefighting. As you can see in the image on the right, we further subdivided these constraints into sub-themes, focusing on aspects such as portability, breathability, and more that provide deeper insights into the challenges and opportunities within this area. This thematic analysis underscores the importance of considering practical factors such as usability, adaptability in the design of the smoke mitigation strategies. Additionally, the figure on the left highlights other key themes around what other mitigation strategies would look like, such as respirators, contextual understanding, air quality monitoring, and clean air designs. So we also began to explore how we could translate these codes that embody the lived experiences into a tangible tool for engineers and other stakeholders to design protective strategies to tackle the current gap in contextually appropriate respiratory protective equipment for wildland firefighters. We consulted with the engineers to understand if there were any frameworks to support the design process centered on the user experience. This finally led us to the Function, Objective, and Constraints framework, also known as FOC framework, which helped us to integrate the unique occupational conditions identified in our study and guide our future design efforts. Functions describe what the design will do or accomplish. Objectives are desirable design features that optimize the design compared to existing interventions. And finally, constraints are strict limits that design must meet to be considered acceptable. We translated our findings into this framework. The primary function is to mitigate exposure to harmful particulate gases. The objectives focus on convenience, sustainability, and cost effectiveness. The constraints capture a significant portion of our ideation session data, such as wildland firefighter needs, environmental factors, and the importance of regulatory compliance. By addressing these elements, the FOC framework offers a comprehensive approach to us for developing contextually appropriate respiratory mitigation strategies for practical use on the field. There is also a critical need for a collaborative approach centered on the wildland firefighters to effectively develop smoke mitigation strategies. This participatory model of collaboration is built on two foundational pillars: health evidence from occupational health and safety, and specific needs of wildland firefighters. Our survey revealed that despite high levels of health concern, only 6% of wildland firefighters reported daily use of respiratory protection. In addition, the weak correlation between level of health concern and PPE usage reveal that simply raising awareness isn't enough. Contextually appropriate protective equipment design and a deeper understanding of smoke health impacts are essential to ensure a regular use. In this collaborative model, engineers engage in a feedback loop with occupational health and safety experts and wildland firefighters, while agencies play a key role in procuring and enabling the use of PPE. Coming to our future directions, one of our key future direction is to publish our findings in an academic journal. By sharing our study in this journal, we aim to communicate the specific needs of wildland firefighters for health protection strategies and participatory model of collaboration to a multidisciplinary audience. Secondly, one of our most exciting development is our application for a 2.5 million NRCAN grant, also called as Natural Resource Canada grant, under the leadership of Dr. Kevin Golovin. We will focus on co-designing smoke mitigation strategies. This grant represents a significant opportunity to sustain and build off the work we initiated through our study. We have established a network of engineers, academics, and industry partners who are excited to collaborate with the wildland firefighters. There is still an opportunity for further stakeholder engagement, such as occupational health and safety and wildfire agencies. Together, our goal is to co-design interventions that are not only effective, but also practical, responsive to unique challenges of this occupation. Finally, one of our key insights from our project was the gap in resource and knowledge sharing around the health impacts of smoke exposure among the wildland firefighters to foster a behavioral shift to adopt respiratory protective equipment. This knowledge translation storybook, a work in progress, is designed to be in simple language, easy to understand, and visually engaging tool, providing evidence-based knowledge on smoke health impacts accessible to all firefighters to support the uptake of respiratory innovations. In terms of our study impact, firstly, our project has bridged a gap in siloed efforts. Our collaborative efforts, which guided our study, Protecting Our Protectors, POP, expanded to POPCON, Protecting Our Protectors Co-Creation Research Network by the end of our study with the submission of the NRCAN grant. POPCON aims to expand a collaborative model in centering wildland firefighters to co-design effective smoke mitigation strategies. Secondly, throughout our study, we engaged in knowledge dissemination by presenting at webinars, research conferences, as seen on the screen. These platforms allowed us to share our research with experts, gain feedback, and engage with stakeholders within and external to the wildfire space to protect the health of wildland firefighters. Our research on respiratory smoke exposure recognizes a very universal challenge faced by wildland firefighters worldwide. The design requirements can be adapted to similar contexts globally. These insights offer a valuable guidance for engineers and occupational health experts and other stakeholders as well to enhance the health and well-being of wildland firefighter during their occupation. By sharing our collaborative model, we aim to inspire further de-siloed work that integrates the wildland firefighters in the research process. Thank you for your attention, and we look forward to any questions you all have.